OPB Podcasts.
It's OPB Politics Now for Friday, April 17th. Last night was the first time voters had a chance to see the leading Republican contenders for Oregon governor face off. The candidates seemed to agree on just about everything, including their disapproval of Governor Tina Kotek, and not one of them uttered the name of their party's currently unpopular president. OPB was there in an event space in beautiful Hillsboro. We're here to break down some of what we learned. Welcome to the podcast. I'm OPB Politics reporter Dirk VanderHart.
I'm OPB Politics reporter Lauren Dake.
Lauren, you braved Highway 26 last night. You traveled out to Hillsboro. Set the scene for us. What was this like?
It was a dark and stormy night, Dirk. No. All right. The debate was in this just sort of large, sort of nondescript warehouse-style event space in Hillsboro.
Sure.
The room was pretty packed. I hate estimating crowd sizes.
But do it anyway.
But I'll do it. But I'll do it for you. I'm going to say 250, 300.
Wow.
I know, maybe not. I tell you, I hate it. There's a lot of people there. It felt like the room was warm. It was lively.
Bubbling with excitement.
Just fizzy, just purely fizzy. And okay, I could not make this up. Right when I got there, I talked to 3 different groups of people before the debate started. And I felt like they perfectly encapsulated the stereotypical voters for each of these candidates, which, like I said, I couldn't have made it up. So the first couple I went up and approached and said, why are you here? And they wanted to, of course, all of them wanted to listen to all the candidates. But the first couple said that they live in Portland, they live in Northeast Portland, they live in Irvington. They're both doctors, semi-retired doctors. One was an internist and one was a GI, so like specialized doctors. And they had been Democrats, but they changed voter registration in, not for this election, but I think they said maybe 2019, so a while ago.
Who do they like?
And they like Dudley.
Okay.
And so, they thought he was maybe somebody who was moderate. Their eye was definitely focused on the general, who could win the general. And they were there because they felt like, Democrats had control of the state for long enough, and they didn't feel like things were going well.
We hear from these people every election.
Yes. But then I talked to the guy that was sitting right next to me. He was from Beaverton. He was an Ed Deal guy. He liked the grassroots energy. He liked that he was a little bit more conservative. He liked his messaging.
Yep.
The other guy I talked to was a Drazen guy. He lived in Portland as well, up on Skyline. He owned his own construction business. What he liked about Drazen was that she had run for governor, she lost, and then she didn't give up, and she stayed engaged, and she was still trying to make Oregon better. So I thought that was a very perfect mix of who these candidates are trying to reach, actually.
And so you're in the crowd, taking the pulse, taking it all in. And eventually the debate starts. I think we're going to get into these candidates a little more in depth. But before we do, I don't know, hit us with a couple takeaways from, it was an hour and a half about, or I don't know how long it was, but something like that. What were your main takeaways of this debate?
It was almost not a debate. It was almost a forum.
Yeah.
It was just so civil and polite. They spent almost no time criticizing each other, and they spent a lot of time criticizing Governor Tina Kotek and just the Democrats and one-party rule. All the wedge issues that we might see, maybe at some future debates hosted by the TV stations or something, guns, abortion, immigration, none of those took center stage whatsoever. Really, I think there was no mention even actually of those issues. Maybe one side mention of immigration, but it was brief and subtle. They talked about the economy, housing, homelessness, forest management issues, public safety issues. They stayed away from the federal government largely. Like you said at the top, they did not, Donald Trump's name was not mentioned. So really, there was very little daylight issue-wise between the candidates that came up. A lot of their policy takes were pretty similar. Cut taxes, ease regulations, increase public safety, manage the forests better.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, if you were coming to this, as we said, it was the first debate with a hope of trying to isolate what candidate you liked based on their issue stances, you were really going to be out of luck. They just purely didn't disagree, that I could tell at least. I think it was more of a, here's an introduction to me, here's my substance. Like let me show you how I would prosecute the case against Governor Kotek in November if I get through this. Let's take it candidate by candidate. First, I think the person most people expect to be a frontrunner, maybe the frontrunner at this point, is Senator Christine Drazan. Like we have said, all the candidates addressed the same sets of questions and responded to them largely similarly. But what did we hear about Drazan, about her vision, or why she's the one that needs to move on?
She's clearly positioning herself as, like you said, the experienced candidate who is best able to take on the governor, Tina Kotek. She has made it clear that's what she wants the audience to focus on. In fact, here's what she said in her closing statements.
The number one question that we all need to be asking ourselves tonight is, who can beat Tina Kotek and make her a one-term governor? That's what matters right now. I am that candidate. I have the policy background. I have gone toe-to-toe with Tina Kotek. I have been in this fight, and I have the scars to prove it.
Yeah, so there, she perfectly summed it up, right? She's a fighter. She's got grit. She's got the determination. She lost, and she's back. She's not giving up.
Yep.
And for her, that framing really serves multiple purposes. She can frame herself as the fighter, and then she's also sort of subtly contrasting herself to Chris Dudley, who also ran for governor, but then he sort of disengaged from politics, right?
Moved away from the state, right?
Left the state.
Yeah.
Like we said, policy-wise, she talked a lot about what everyone said, like, let's make Oregon more business-friendly. She pledged lower taxes. She said under Kotek, this housing crisis has gotten worse. She did have a funny quip about it being an election year because the governor has finally realized that the economy is in trouble. And that's a nod to the fact that Kotek recently announced this Economic Prosperity Council and is now making the economy part of her platform.
The same week she announced her reelection bid.
Yes.
She did that, yes.
And, one other thing here that's worth mentioning, I think what Drazan is really hoping will be different about this time from when she took on Kotek versus when she took on Kotek in 2022 is, of course, there's no Betsy Johnson factor.
Yes.
If she wins a primary this time, she's not going to be battling on two different fronts. She can just hone in on Kotek.
That is definitely the theory of the case she's presenting. I mean, for listeners who are not paying attention 4 years ago, that was a very interesting governor's race that featured Drazan as the Republican, Kotek as the Democrat, and then a former Democratic state senator named Betsy Johnson who had forsaken her party and was running as an independent candidate. Drazan believes, I think, that was a defining factor of her 2022 loss. She said recently that by the time she got done sort of proving in 22, she was the most viable candidate to defeat the Democrats and sort of dispatching with Johnson. Kotek already had been able to build up all this steam. I think Drazan has said she had an insurmountable fundraising lead by that point, and so Drazan just couldn't catch up. That is her version of events, at least. So, without a third-party candidate in this race, Drazan is now, again, as we've said, arguing she's the one with the best shot. She could have done it last time, maybe without Johnson. Of course, she has to make it past this competitive primary field. I mean, this is one of the more competitive primary fields we've seen, in part because not only is Drazan a former gubernatorial candidate for the party, and nominee for the party, but there's another person who Republicans have nominated as their guy for governor.
Right. Former Portland Trailblazer, Chris Dudley, who ran against Governor Kitzhaber in 2010 and has noted many times over that he came closer to defeating a Democrat for governor closer than anyone else in the past 4 decades.
His line is, we went to bed that night thinking we won. We woke up the next day to learn we lost. It was a very, very close race.
Right. And, so he has that experience, but at the same time, he is clearly trying to solidify this notion that he is an outsider, that these problems that we currently have in Oregon, cannot be solved by someone who's been in politics, somebody who's been in Salem, like Drazan. He said, all these experienced politicians have had their shot and things are not working. And now it's time for, a former NBA player who went to Yale and studied economics to have his turn. And that's Chris Dudley.
Yep.
So here's how he put it last night.
We have to win this election. I am tired of the protest votes, and we have to have a candidate that can reach out and bring people together. We need an outsider. Salem has failed. Salem's problems will not be solved by somebody from Salem.
So beyond that, we heard some other sort of big picture pitches that he's making, that if he were to be elected, he would declare a state of emergency on education on day one, that he's tired of seeing open air drug deals in the street, that he is really focused on these big picture problems and ideas. And it's true that we have not really seen him drill down into a lot of policy-specific conversations. And I was actually reading some of the archive stories about when he ran against Kitzhaber, and a lot of people mentioned that at the same time too, that he was just not really honed in on specifics. So maybe that's just not the strategy he thinks he needs to win right now. But, one strategy he definitely has in his corner that could help him win is that Uncle Phil money.
We always talk about Nike co-founder Phil Knight in these governor's races because he has proven to be a major force. He backed Dudley in 2010, but with like a relative, I can't remember. It was not very much money. This year, he has already given Dudley $1 million. And that, I think, is one big reason why Dudley is being seen as a top candidate here. I mean, you talk to people about his race, a lot of people aren't that taken with the strategy so far. They think his ads have been a little bit too focused on the general election, not quite as focused on the Republican base that's going to react to some of the things he would say. But he's got $1 million from Phil Knight. There is a suggestion in that $1 million that there are millions of dollars more behind it. And anytime a candidate can draw from potentially unlimited campaign funds, they have a chance. They have the ability to buy the ads in Portland and elsewhere that are going to get their message out. So, I think he is coming with a sort of shadow force behind him when he walks into the hall. I don't know if he can capitalize on that. We're going to see.
He's ready to rebound, Dirk.
Yeah,
he's ready to make some rebounds, give Oregon a rebound. You had a really interesting story this week about
you.
You're welcome, about the prediction markets, which is basically people placing bets on pretty much anything that they want to bet on, including who's going to win the May primary. And I'm curious if you had a chance to check them out after this debate and see if there were any changes.
I did, yes. These are these things where you can say, I think Drazen is going to win the race. And depending on where the market is sitting at that point, that would dictate what you have to pay for what is known as a contract for her winning. And if that happens, then you get some money out of it. It's far more complicated than that, but let's just leave it there. And what was interesting when we looked at this story was it was bucking, these markets were bucking some of the conventional wisdom, right? As we just said, everyone assumes that Dudley is going to be a leader in this race, one leader, because he's just got the money to do it. These prediction markets don't see that. And they didn't see it when we ran the story earlier this week. They don't see it now. As I'm looking at Poly Market right now, that's one of these things. Drazen's sitting at a 44% chance of being the nominee. Ed Deal has been really, really close with her lately. He's sitting at a 37% chance. And Dudley is farther back at 16%.
Wow.
Danielle Bethel, who was there last night, is at 4%, which is higher than she's been. She may have juiced her odds. And look, I just need to say this. Like, people talk about prediction markets. People roll their eyes. They're like, why are you talking about this? And I agree that these things are really, they're insidious in some ways. You can bet on whether Christ is coming back. You can bet on literally anything. There is some study, some academic literature that has suggested that at least in big presidential elections, these things can really tell us something and in fact be more accurate than polls. Well, we don't have a public poll on this race right now. There are prediction markets. We figured we would take a look at it. I am not at all saying that Christine Drazen is a 44%. I don't know, but it's just interesting to see what these things are saying when we have so little information. So anyway, that's my screed.
Okay, well, let's get back to the debate and the last two candidates. I'm going to talk about Representative Ed Deal from Scio. I always get that wrong. Okay, so he's really selling himself as, kind of the best of both worlds. He's got the lawmaking experience. He's a businessman. He served 2 terms as a state representative. So he has enough of the Salem knowledge to know what's happening, but he also has a strong business background. He said he created his own engineering type business, it seemed like.
He helped found a business that helps factories automate. So like, I don't know exactly what it looks like, but it's sort of smooth the process of making things and make sure machines are helping do the work in a more streamlined fashion, as I understand it.
Okay. And just basically his pitch is like, he's the guy, he believes he can energize the Republicans who have become sort of disillusioned by not winning over and over. And he pointed to his very successful referendum campaign against the gas tax. And clearly that's how he's going to pitch himself. Here's what he said last night.
I hope with the referendum effort, I've proven to Oregonians, I know how to lead, I know how to rally folks, I know how to get stuff done, big things done. I've done it my entire career in business. I think we need a governor, we need a candidate that can win and go toe-to-toe against Tina Kotek. I'm going to rally more voters, more Republicans who've been sitting on the bench for a long time.
So he kept hitting that, he's a grassroots guy. He can gather the signatures, knock on the doors. But I think one of his biggest hurdles here is name recognition. I mean, compared to Drazen and Dudley, he just simply is not as well known. But of course, the gas tax did help him a little bit on that front.
Yeah, I mean, he's not as well known. He's not raising the money Deal has loaned himself $190,000 at this point. That is a pretty big proportion of the money he's raised overall. So not only is, he doesn't have the name recognition built in, he is not necessarily showing the fundraising it would take to build that name recognition through the normal channels. But this is why he keeps talking about the gas tax referendum. So let's back up a little bit. When Democrats passed a gas tax hike late last summer, I think, Deal and State Senator Bruce Starr took up the mantle and said, no, we are going to launch this campaign. We're going to collect enough signatures to put this before voters, because they knew and they expected that when voters got a chance, they would reject it. And they did that, and they were, we talked about it so much, but spectacularly successful. In very short order, they had collected 250,000 signatures. And it's those 250,000 signatures that Deal is really relying on here, because not only can he reconnect with that voter base and say, here, I'm the guy that did this. This was a big win when Republicans hadn't had a win in a long time. But he can supposedly get out the vote for those people. He's also... He's also going to do it again, is what I meant to say, because Democrats passed this bill that disconnected the state's tax code from a bunch of things that Donald Trump and congressional Republicans did last year. Deal is now saying he's going to start the campaign all over again, collect signatures, and put that one before the ballot. This is one reason why, if you look at his website or any of his merch, he's Ed No Tax Deal. This is really the vibe he's riding. I think people see that grassroots energy as really potentially very potent for him. It's just they look at his fundraising numbers and they're like, but how's he gonna go beyond that?
Yeah, he was wearing a red shirt last night that did say Ed No Tax Deal embroidered on it. It took me a second to get that, and then I was like, oh, okay. Okay, so the final candidate last night, Marion County Commissioner Danielle Bethel, she sort of surprised people last night. I think she surprised a lot of people in the crowd. Apparently there was, just to back up, she is sort of perceived as probably being the one, the most long shot candidate out there.
Of those four,
yeah. Yes. And I guess there were some rumblings, apparently, when organizing the debate about whether she should be on the stage with the other three. And then I think people were really pleased to hear from her. She was very fiery, probably the most fiery out there. She certainly held her own. She came off as a true insider, someone with very technical understanding of how government works. Here's one thing that she said.
I'm obviously not the most funded candidate on this stage. I can't loan myself money, and Phil Knight did not write me a check. But I am the candidate that 100% has shown up every day for the last 6 years doing this work. I'm already doing the work of an executive. Every single question that was answered here tonight is real life things I'm doing every single day.
So we did hear her drill down into specifics, maybe arguably more than some of the other candidates. And I think she actually brought a lot of energy to the debate.
Yeah, that was the only barb we saw thrown the entire debate, when she says, I didn't have Phil Knight lend me money. That was clearly a shot at Dudley, or I'm not lending myself money, clearly a shot at Deal. You heard some laughter there. But yeah, I think she's positioning herself as this kind of technocrat. She almost risked being too wonky at some point, because she was going into all these sorts of plans and arrangements and things that you do as a county executive that I'm not sure that the Republican electorate is really going to glom onto and run with. But certainly I think she gave the appearance of someone who understands the issues. I think she said at one point, I can get into the weeds with a Tina Kotek if you put me forward and we can have that debate. We know Tina Kotek likes to get into the weeds. And so she's positioning herself as sort of this really policy wonky person that's ready to do the job. I think, I think she held her own last night. We'll just see. I'm not sure that it translates. The reason she's seen as a long shot is just she hasn't raised much money.
Right. Okay, I think, listen, the challenge for all Republicans in the primary, which we know we have talked about many times, is they have to walk this pretty fine line, right? They have to appeal to their base, which is often more conservative, but they have to keep an eye on the general election in November and not alienating those more moderate voters who might consider voting for a Republican
who they would need.
Who they need.
Right.
More moderate and unaffiliated voters. Okay. This is just simply not something that Republicans have managed to do for 4+ decades, which is why we have not had a Republican governor in that long. You watched the debate last night. Did you see any evidence of anyone even trying to walk that fine line?
I mean, arguably all of them were walking the fine line weirdly, right? Like, we've touched on this, but this is a group of candidates who had little to no disagreement on any given topic. You did this, but a rundown of things they all agree on, no controversy. Lower taxes, right? Eliminating this cat tax or reducing income taxes. Less regulation to ease permitting. Opening up state lands to more logging. A firmer hand with people who are experiencing homelessness. Demanding accountability in schools. Firing agency heads. Maybe even getting rid of some agencies altogether. I think Bethel said DEQ doesn't need to be around or suggested it. Getting drugs off the streets, removing undocumented immigrants. I think there was some discussion of this. If they've committed crimes, there was some discussion about sanctuary debates. Obviously, there's nothing surprising there in terms of a Republican platform. But I think with maybe the exception of immigration enforcement, those just don't seem like the kinds of issues that are going to motivate Democratic attacks, be the things that you splash on TV or in mailers. Here's what we didn't hear about. We didn't hear about abortion. We didn't hear about gun regulations. We didn't hear about Donald Trump, as you noted, who, whether Republicans like it or not, their candidate is going to have to grapple with once they get to the general election. I mean, often in these primaries, you will see at least one candidate go after the Trump vote pretty hard. But, this is a year where the president has attempted to send troops into Portland, where he has stepped up immigration enforcement in this state, where he has tried to end vote by mail, which is pretty popular here. It was very, very stark, I think, for them not to acknowledge any of that. And maybe that was part of the calculus of the Republican questions. I don't know. We have said this before in this podcast, but Democrats are certainly going to try to make this election almost entirely about Trump. The frontrunners in the GOP race are not in any rush to get there.
Right. I mean, we've already seen that. We already know Kotek is positioning herself as the person who's going to protect Oregonians against the Trump agenda. So what do you think we can count on at this stage about how any Republican would fare up against Governor Kotek and up against that message?
It is, obviously very, very hard to say. Anything I say now can be easily proven wrong in the future. I mean, look, to the extent that this race is intriguing, it's because polling shows that Governor Kotek is not popular among Oregonians. She has not convinced them at this point, 4 years in, that her policy choices are improving the state. And as we've talked about, a lot of the data doesn't show that improvement either. I think if Kamala Harris was the president right now, this race would be a lot more likely to garner national attention because that would be a race where Democrats probably were facing some headwinds. And suddenly, Kotek's unpopularity becomes more and more of an issue. The conventional wisdom is that with Trump in office, it's just a lot less clear that Republicans are going to be able to get the momentum they need to flip, a state that's gone blue for 40 years. As we saw last night, the GOP field is going to do its best to make this entire campaign about local issues. National issues are absolutely going to creep in. That is the nature of politics these days. But to answer your question, I mean, I think we have seen one poll early on that did theoretically put Kotek up against three of these candidates. I think it was Dudley, Deal, and Drazen. And that poll showed, and I don't remember when it went into the field, but Kotek came ahead in all three of those matchups. There's just a long, long way to go until November. And so, that things change, things get crazy. Even in this race, we're going to have ballots go out here in 12 days. Things could shake up meaningfully in this race, too. You just never know what's going to happen in politics.
Right. And that was the first debate. There's a couple more, I believe, scheduled. So,
And I bet we'll be talking about them.
I bet we will be.
Lauren, thank you so much for traveling out to Hillsboro last night, being our eyes and ears on the ground. It's been a pleasure to chat with you about it today.
Thank you, Dirk.
This week's episode of OPB Politics Now was produced by Andrew Thien. Our engineer is Nilene Silva. Our music comes from Audio Network. We'll be back next week with more news from across the Pacific Northwest. Until then, thanks as always for your support, and thanks for listening.